Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of To The Point. Monsoon session is into its second week and the deadlock between the government and the opposition continues, raising fears of a complete washout. How are the regional parties poising themselves and what's the shape of the politics they'll assume? Joining me now is a popular face of Biju Janata Dal. I welcome Baijayant Panda on To The Point.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me begin by asking you, Jay. How do you really see the future of the monsoon session, given the number of limited days which are left?
I think what's happening is very unfortunate because considering the last session where we had the best productivity in a decade in Parliament, and today we are back to the same old situation where Parliament is deadlocked, nothing is functioning, and you can see increasing chorus of disenchantment with Parliament. Right. So right now the situation doesn't look good because there seems to be hardened stances between the government and the main opposition party. Now you mentioned regional parties. I think many of us have our own perspective on things. As far as BJD is concerned, our track record in Parliament is not of disrupting. Our track record in Parliament is that we take decisions based on the issues, right, not on hardened positions which are predetermined.
But in fact, I'll talk about BJD's real strategy in a while from now. But what I wanted to ask you, do you really see a battle of wits which is playing out between the Treasury benches and the opposition, given the fact that opposition is adamant and the government is just trying to weaken the opposition by raking up the state issues?
Look, there are clearly egos involved. Okay. Because it may not be said so openly, but there is a perception that many in the opposition are blocking the government because when the party which is today in government was in opposition, they also blocked Parliament functioning. So it has become a tit for tat. But I think that damages Parliament and more importantly, it damages the nation. There are many issues on which we either have some agreement across political spectrum or we are very near to some agreement. Take for example GST. Right. Now this is something that parties, whether today they are in opposition or government, have supported over many years. Whatever issues have been raised have been referred to committees, and we are almost at a point of reaching agreement on all issues, and yet it is stuck because of this parliamentary deadlock. So that's why I would say it is unfortunate. Not that on every issue there is agreement. There are right. issues on which there are fundamental disagreements. Right. But whether it is any allegation, whether it is a legislative issue on which you don't have agreement or you are very close to an agreement, the idea of Parliament is to resolve all these issues through discussion and debate and give and take.
But don't you think there's an interesting pattern which is seen in this monsoon session, because the opposition is actually coming together on issues, not on bills, and whether those issues are related to their parties or not, but they are in a way coalescing themselves together on issues, not on bills. So what do you really have to say about this emerging pattern which is to be seen in this monsoon session?
Well, many in the opposition who may not always be seeing eye to eye have come together in the recent past on bills also, right, and also on some issues. Now take for example some of these allegations which are made. Now whether they be allegations against union ministers or against chief ministers or against people from even from opposition parties, some of these allegations sound quite serious and we are quite shocked by it. But the way to resolve that is not by first demanding that some action has to be taken and then Parliament can function. Parliament should function nevertheless, and maybe action is called for, and we will press very hard for action to be taken against any guilty party. But we also want debate to happen. We want these issues to be, we want to take the opportunity of pressing hard these matters on the government of the day and putting them on the back foot and making them answer for these questions.
But Jay, if I could ask you, why don't we see BJD aggressively voicing what they really feel? Because your party's strategy has been to maintain an equidistance posture both from Congress and the BJP. So we don't find BJD, spelling out the issues very vociferously. For example, your party stand on Lalit Gate, your party stand on Vyapam. We hear some of the scant voices, sometimes Bhartuhari Mahatab saying something, then we have Tathagat Satpathy saying something, but not very clearly the party's strategy is spelled out.
Let me correct your impression. I think one of the problems is that the media and the public have become so inured to all the shouting in Parliament that they have difficulty listening to reasonable voices even when they are being very strident. Now, we have been very strident on all of these issues. You go back to one session, we have we put up certain amendments on the land bill,
right.
And the government accepted several of those amendments, and it happened because we put it up stridently. We did not take the stand that nothing should happen. We said that as long as farmers get a fair deal and they get a share of the profits of the projects that will come up in that land, that is what we have been looking for. So we are looking for solutions.
Right.
Now, you mentioned
Vyapam.
But
there is a perception, there is also a perception which many analysts said that sometimes, you know, the regional parties, given the huge mandate which BJP has got in the last Lok Sabha elections, there are very few opportunities for regional parties to actually show that, look, they are also empowered. So maybe through legislations or through some issues, you're trying to voice it up.
Make no mistake, with 20 MPs in the Lok Sabha, we are empowered. And our vote counts. It counts in committees, it counts in Rajya Sabha, and we have made this very, very clear, and people in government and people in opposition understand that. I think the problem is because we are acting in the manner that a party in a parliamentary system ought to act. And that is a bit old-fashioned, and a lot of people who are observing from outside don't recognize it. Now, let me tell you very, very frankly, on the issues that you have raised, such as Vyapam,
right,
such as Lalit Gate, such as some of the other allegations that have come up. You mentioned some of my colleagues. Now, I myself have gone on a dozen TV shows, and I have tweeted about it, and I have gone on social media, and I have made it very, very clear that we are quite shocked by some of these allegations. These are serious allegations, and some heads have to roll. Somebody has to pay the price. But we are also very clear that you cannot hang somebody without giving them a chance to say whatever they have to say in their defense, and then putting them on the back foot.
According to you, what is the way out? Because opposition like Congress and the other parties, which are really obstinate at this point of time, and they say first resignation and then discussion. What would the parties like you would really say at this moment? Or if I have to ask you, if one solution which you could offer to the government at this point of time?
Well, I don't know what solution I would offer to the government, because they have been in the opposite position themselves.
Exactly.
And so I think they are facing their own karma, if you will. Now, I would only say this, that we are not going soft on the government. We definitely think these are serious allegations. We definitely think there have to be consequences. We definitely think that the government has to act maybe against some of its own ministers and chief ministers and so on. But the point is, let me emphasize, you cannot ask, if it were a courtroom, you cannot first ask that the person be hanged and then you have the trial. That's not correct. So we are definitely insistent that there have to be consequences. We are, we want to put the government on the back foot, but we also want a debate to take place. We also want those who have allegations against them, they should have a chance to answer, and there should be a free and frank discussion in Parliament.
But Congress being the main opposition party in Lok Sabha, and of course the numbers are in a minority as far as NDA is concerned in Rajya Sabha. Talking particularly about Lok Sabha, do you think that the Congress is just raking up issues for the sake of disrupting the Parliament? Is it a meaningless disruption? You yourself gave me the example of a GST bill, which AIADMK and Congress were implacably opposed to this GST bill earlier. Then it went to the select committee. Then by and large, most of the provisions were approved. And now, except for that one little thing where now the government has agreed to compensate the states for the next 5 years. So don't you think that this was a meaningless disruption as far as parties like Congress and AIADMK is concerned?
The bane of our parliamentary proceedings has become that many political parties, whether they are in opposition or government, they have taken the path of tu me me and disruption rather than sticking to their own principle. If parties in opposition today would abide by what they themselves said when they were in government, then things would be so much better. And if parties in government today had not behaved the way that they behaved when they were in opposition, they would not be facing such tu me me. But at some point we have to say, let the past be the past, let enough be enough, and we should go beyond tit for tat. There are real, first Parliament suffers. Next, of course, the country suffers the most.
Right.
But what we forget is that the opposition suffers more than the government, because these are our opportunities to really put the government on the back foot. If we want to do agitation and disruption, we can do that on the streets. That is what political demonstrations are for. In Parliament, we have to put the government on the back foot.
But Jay, when you talk to me, I mean, what you are really telling me, because most of the leaders from all the political parties say that they don't really subscribe to this kind of a disruptive agenda in the House. But when it actually comes to playing out within the House, the situation is totally different. What do they really address? What are the political parties, or in fact the leaders particularly, what are they really addressing to? Are they really looking at the short-term political gains? Do they have some elections? Maybe I would say a Bihar election, which is around the corner. Are the political parties really leveraging the parliament session for, maybe from the point of view of a Bihar election?
I think you have raised all the relevant points. The fact is very simple. I'm not sure that this disruption actually works. If you look at election results, I don't think parties win and lose elections based on whether they have disrupted parliament or not. I think that winning or losing elections happens on very many other things. So a time has come when we have to evaluate what is actually the benefit. You're right, I think some politicians probably see this as catering to some other event like an election or something, but I don't agree with that. And I'll say something else. You said, what do political parties think? What do leaders think? The irony is, in both houses, there have been many all-party resolutions condemning disruption and empowering the speaker many times that she must take action against anybody who disrupts. Yet, when actually there is a disruption and the speaker tries to take action, there are all kinds of pleas for not implementing the rule that she is empowered to do. Perhaps I think we should emulate, I believe it is the Chhattisgarh Assembly which has a rule that instead of leaving the ball in the speaker's court, because it's very awkward for her, she has to have consensus across the aisle of all political parties. I believe in Chhattisgarh Assembly there is a rule of automatic disqualification for any member who goes into the well of the House. If we do something like that, perhaps we can hope to have better discipline in the House.
But you know, there's a whole lot of reports coming now that if at all there is a complete washout of this session, some 260 crores of the taxpayers' money is going to just go down the drains. Do you think that the parliamentarians should be held accountable?
First of all, 260 crores is a big sum, but it is a very small sum compared to the cost that the country will incur. Because let's take, for example, GST. Now, India is a country of the size of a continent, yet it is not one common market. We are not benefiting from the comparative advantages of each of the states in doing commerce and trade between the states. It gives benefit to foreign countries to export to India rather than having trade inside India. So the cost to the country is much higher than 260 crores. And see, of course, we parliamentarians should be we are held accountable. We may not be penalized. You know, some of us return some of the salary proportionately to the days lost because of conscience. But that's a very small token thing. We are accountable in the eyes of the voters every 5 years. But that's not enough. We had to do something else because the country is suffering a lot.
But I really appreciate the positive sentiment you're talking about. But across the world, it has been seen that whenever a disruption happens, in UK Parliament, of course, it's rare. Disruptions are quite rare as compared to the Indian Parliament. So it does affect the credibility and the image of the parliamentarians. But it doesn't seem to matter. Disruptions or no disruption, it's all about power.
Well, disruption,
not principles.
Disruption is not the norm in most parliaments. It has become the norm in India. But we forget something. It is not that disruptions were never the norm in other parliaments. If you look at, you mentioned the UK Parliament, if you look at the US Senate and the Congress, only about 100 odd years ago, they used to have fist fights, they used to have wrestling inside the House. Something changed, and I think we are undergoing that change. There are many reasons for this.
I think it would be wrong to condemn the parliamentarians completely when they are disrupting. And in fact, the larger message could be that they are trying to find some sense out of that chaos, trying to bring some kind of an order. But Jay, I'll have to take a break here. When we come back, we talk about the fallout of POSCO. What is the centre really doing, and what is BJD going to do about the steelmaker giant POSCO? Back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching To The Point with B2 Janata Dal leader Baijayant Panda. Now that the Modi government has decided that all the leases will be auctioned, what really happens with the steelmaker POSCO? Where are we really heading to?
I think it's very unfortunate what has happened with POSCO, because almost a decade ago, when they came in with their plans, it was the single biggest investment proposal India had ever seen. And I think even till today, at 70,000 crores, it remains probably the single biggest investment proposal. And it's very unfortunate, I think, that they have suspended activities, at least temporarily, for the project. And you have raised a valid point. You see, there have been two major hurdles, and this is not limited to POSCO. We have had hurdles throughout the country on two major issues. One is land acquisition, which has been a very contentious issue, and that has affected POSCO as well in the past.
Right.
And also regarding access to raw materials, iron ore being one such example which POSCO needed, because there have been scandals and scams in the manner that raw materials were given out in the past. Now, ironically, as far as POSCO is concerned, the land acquisition for their phase 1 was completed 2 years ago, even though that had a delay from the beginning, but that was completed. But in the meantime, of course, they had not secured their raw material, that is the captive mining lease, and whatever understanding they had with the state government was being processed but had been stuck at the central government level. So we should not point fingers at whose responsibility it is. There has been some delay at every level, really, to say the truth.
POSCO basically has had a very tumultuous journey in the last 10 years because of a whole lot of regularity issues and all those things. But now the POSCO is really becoming a case in example because of the high pitch of Make in India campaign, which Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself is talking about. And there are fears that POSCO might pull out. How are you really going to raise this issue? Because your government had signed the MOU way back in 2005. The ball is totally now in the centre's court. You are not getting to raise issues in Parliament, which your party, at the beginning of the session, you all had said that you will raise the POSCO issue as to what is the way forward with the centre. How will you really...
We are very concerned because Odisha has been successful in attracting a lot of investment. This was a flagship project, and you have rightly raised that because of the disruption in Parliament, we are not getting the opportunity to raise this. The reality is this. We have today, this government has changed the rules regarding raw materials allocation, and we are not against that. We have ourselves been saying that precious natural resources should be auctioned. So we are in support of that. Now the problem that has happened is you have had a delay of nearly 10 years, and what POSCO had was an agreement with our state government, which was being processed by the central government, which said that they would have captive mines. Now captive mines...
the state government is already allocated to Kandahar.
So that's in the process. Now the point is this, captive mines for large users, industries, not for selling the ore, but for their own value addition within the country, within the state, has been an accepted principle. There have been Supreme Court judgments on this. There has been government policy encouraging that you do captive mining, because then if you just do mining on a commercial basis, you are just sending out raw material. But if you encourage say Steel Authority of India or major steel companies even in the private sector to come and have their own captive mine, with the condition that they should set up a steel plant, with the condition that they should employ thousands of people and pay lots of revenue to the state and the center. This is a good thing. Now the rules have changed. Today everything has to be auctioned. So I think it has to be considered that there is a principle called...
But now with the fact that Steel and Mining Minister Narendra Kumar Tomar completely putting a lid on that chapter, saying that everything will be through the auctions, POSCO will have to bid again. Doesn't it look like a closed chapter for POSCO in Odisha?
And this comes in a different changed economic circumstance, because several years ago when POSCO was first here to put up the plant, the world economy was booming, the commodities market was booming because China consumption was very high. Now today China consumption has fallen, Indian consumption has not yet picked up to replace Chinese consumption globally. So the economic circumstances today are not as favorable. So we have to do a lot more as a country, we have to do a lot more as a government, either state government or central government, to attract investment, because investors don't see the high returns which they were seeing a few years ago. So this brings us to the question of how do we solve this problem. Now,
don't you feel really discouraged when recently Prime Minister Narendra Modi met POSCO's CEO when he went to South Korea? They discussed investment plans in Gujarat, they discussed investment plans in Maharashtra, but on Odisha they remained totally non-committal.
So this has been the traditional pattern for 65 years because of earlier policies at the central level. States with mineral resources oddly did not get investment in mineral industries because of poor policies. Now in the last dozen years in Odisha we have got a lot of steel plants and sponge iron plants because we incentivized, we said if you want mining lease here, please invest in the plant here, and that is what needs to be done. So let me repeat something, we are not against auctioning, we have been the first to ask for auctioning from Odisha and from BJD. Now what should be there? There should be some prioritization process if you are putting up value addition downstream investment. So today if you simply auction a coal mine, it has a different value. But if you auction it with a linkage to a power production, a power plant which is to come up, then you are assuring many more jobs and more revenue for the government.
But what's the reason, what do you really think is the reason why the central government is actually non-committal? Do you really see some state politics, the cooperative federalism which Narendra Modi is talking about,
I'm
really
not
playing
sure.
out between the centre and the state?
I don't know whether politics is involved or not, but I would, clearly there is a loss to the state. Clearly there is a loss to the nation if a large investment cannot happen despite solving the land acquisition problem. That is solved 2 years ago.
Right.
Despite that, if it cannot happen, then there is something wrong and we must find a win-win solution.
Okay.
So those who have had agreements in place before the new policy came in, should there, there is a concept called being grandfathered. That means a contract which pre-exists the new rules.
Right.
So maybe should that be the way to be looked at? This is something that we must have discussion, something on which Parliament must discuss.
Right, and I'm sure if POSCO really withdraws, it's going to be a real first dent on Make in India campaign, so all eyes would be on that, and of course all the best to you for that project as well. But coming to the devolution of funds, Jay, the way it's happening, talking particularly about the 14th Finance Commission, Centre is going hammer and tongs saying that the devolution of funds has increased from 34% to 42%. But all the non-BJP states, the leaders with whom I have spoken, they are basically ruing the fact that it's not the way as they are spelling it out. Do you really see some kind of a mathematical jugglery which really the Centre is talking about? Are they trying to mislead the people? What do you really have to say on that?
The concept of cooperative federalism is good, and we have been asking for it not just now but from the days of late Biju Patnaik, that states should be given more fiscal devolution, economic freedom as Biju Babu used to call it. So in that context we welcome what the Prime Minister has announced, but do the numbers add up? Now Odisha Chief Minister Shri Naveen Patnaik has written to the Honorable Prime Minister, and in Odisha's calculation the numbers don't pan out, because although we are getting extra funds, but there have been also reduction of central funds for many centrally sponsored schemes, which are being streamlined and they are supposedly being left to the state.
I think there is a curtailment on the backward region grant fund as well.
That is another example. So we can go into the individual components, but the Odisha Chief Minister's letter to the Honorable Prime Minister points out that as per our calculation we are actually getting net more than 2,000 crores less. Now that we are seeking answers, because what has been told, what has been announced at central level does not seem to match up in terms of our calculation. So of course this needs to be resolved, because the idea of cooperative federalism is that more funds will flow to states, not that you announce that in principle but in practice it doesn't happen.
But what do you have to really say when BJP party president Amit Shah says something like the economically backward states like Odisha will really benefit out of this auctioning of coal and mines or whatever is happening, and they will really be the biggest beneficiaries?
Well, they ought to be, because this is something...
so they don't need a special category status.
So that's a different aspect. So special category status is something different, because we can discuss about that separately. I have, we have argued it. Our party has argued it many times. But without going into the aspect of special category status, yes, states that have mineral reserves, when they are auctioned, ought to get more. They ought to get more on royalty. Royalties were manipulated for many decades by lobbies, which meant that the state governments got a pittance out of it. The local residents who were affected by the mining activities in their area did not see the roads, the schools, the colleges, which should have come up from royalty money. So that's due. But if despite that the states are not getting more funds from the devolution that is happening, then something is wrong. So we need the accounts to be explained, we need the numbers to be reconciled, and whatever is the truth will come out in the open.
This issue also is not being very vociferously pointed out by the parties.
Well, several regional parties and state governments.
Everything is left to the Niti Aayog meetings. Well, not much comes out of it.
Well, many state governments, including state governments run by the same party that runs the central government, they have pointed this out. Now, this is the first year when such a change in devolution has happened, so I am sure the truth will come out once the actual funds go out. But the real problem is that since Parliament is not functioning, we are not able to press home this point. So this is a very, very fundamental issue.
So this entire journey of last a little more than a year, or what you have seen BJP, would you really say that Achhe Din have arrived?
Well, I don't want to comment on Achhe Din, because I think we should not get caught up in hubris. The last time that happened was in 2004, when another government started saying such things and the electorate penalized at the elections. So now I think I would like to say this. We are not yet a middle income country. It is true that we have a large and growing middle class, but we still have hundreds of millions of people that are living in very poor conditions. And for them, it will, Achhe Din are not there yet, because they have to get the basics of health and education assured to them. So until that is there, I don't think anybody should claim that we have achieved already Achhe Din.
Thanks. It was a pleasure talking to you, Mr. J. Panda, on To The Point. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that's it on this episode of To The Point. See you next time with another personality. Goodbye and thanks for watching.